Robert Gruler here. Today we're talking about criminal trespass in Arizona. Criminal trespass is actually a kind of a broad-ranging series of statutes. There are 3 statutes in total, and they range in different degrees, and they have different levels of criminality. They have different requirements, different elements, and so we're going to break those down a little bit, but mostly in this video we're going to be talking about criminal trespass in the 3rd degree, because this is the most common type of trespass that we see. We see this a lot out of Scottsdale, particularly in Old Town. We see it in other areas where there's a high concentration of bars and those types of venues. And so we'll talk about that most, but let's take a quick look at how these statutes work so you have an understanding of how the laws work in Arizona and where your case may fall. So as I said earlier, there are 3 degrees of criminal trespass. You've got a Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3. Class 1 is the most serious, and this is mostly involving residential property. So say, for example, you have a home and somebody that you don't know or somebody that you don't want in your home or not expecting in your home, somebody who doesn't live there, enters your residence. That is trespassing at a residential property. They are coming onto your property, they know they're doing that, and that is trespass. For that type of trespass, that's a Class 6 felony. Okay, if the same type of concept, if that same type of thing happens and that person comes onto property and destroys something religious, that's also a felony. If they come on to a public utility, a critical public utility area like a power center or a water station or something like that, that's even more serious. That's a Class 5 felony. And so we don't see that a whole lot, but it is a little bit more common in terms of somebody coming into a residence. Now, if they come into a gated area, like if they come onto your yard, or if it's a peeping Tom type of a situation, that is something that is also a misdemeanor, but it is a 1st degree because it involves residential property. When it is non-residential, so say we're talking about a bar or we're talking about a commercial property or something where people are not living, and somebody comes onto that property, in this case, if this is you or somebody that you love or care about, if you go into that property and you never had permission to do that, they'll charge that as a criminal trespass in the 2nd degree. So this is really when you have no permission at all. It's when you've never gotten permission, you've never had permission, you will never get permission, and you go into that property. That's what's charged as a 2nd degree criminal trespass. The one that we see most often, and we're going to dive into this, it's really the most problematic of the 3. It's something that a lot of people are charged for, and we believe totally unnecessarily. It's criminal trespass in the 3rd degree. It's this final one here at the bottom. And you can see here that I said here that it's when you have permission, but then that permission is revoked. So you have permission to go into property, you go into a bar, you go into a club, you go into a restaurant, you were granted permission to do that, but then you're asked to leave. You either don't leave or you leave and you come back. Then they'll charge you with criminal trespass in the 3rd degree. This is a Class 3 misdemeanor, so it's the lowest level of a misdemeanor that we have, but it's still a criminal offense. And so it's going to go through the same criminal process as any other crime in Arizona, so it's very important that you obviously deal with this seriously so you can avoid having a criminal conviction. But this is something that we see very often. It's not uncommon. Particularly out of Scottsdale, they really like to write this. If you have been asked to leave and you don't, or there's any ambiguity about that, they'll just cite you with it. They'll say, good luck, you're on your own, go deal with it in court, we don't care, you're being charged with trespass. And so what does the statute really say? Well, it's saying that you have to be on some sort of non-commercial property or non-residential property. It needs to be commercial, and you need to be given a reasonable request to leave by somebody with the permission to do so. So a bouncer, an owner, an officer who is essentially acting in capacity of somebody who does own that property. Somebody gives you a reasonable request to leave, and either you don't leave or you come back. And you come back and you're coming back into the property. That's generally how we see criminal trespass in the 3rd degree. So this happens a lot. And in Old Town or in any one of these bar scenes, it's very easy to misinterpret conversations. It's very easy to not hear certain things. It's very easy, and we see this probably most common, to be asked to leave and not be given a reasonable amount of time to do so. So somebody will come up to you and they'll say, hey, you've had too much to drink, or you got into an altercation, we're going to ask everybody to leave, and you begin to gather your things, you start to pay your bill, you do something, and the person who asked you to leave doesn't think that's fast enough, or they don't give you any time to actually comply with that request, and so the police are called. They come in, drag you out, boom, you're charged with criminal trespass and probably 10 other things, especially if it's out of Scottsdale. So what do we do in that situation? Obviously, that's not something that should rise to a level of criminality. You shouldn't be convicted of something that you had no reasonable opportunity to comply with. So how do we defend against that? Well, we go down the elements of the statute, just like we do in any criminal case, and we start thinking about where is their case lacking? Where is the evidence not conforming to the law or what the intent of the statute is? And so I've written some very brief defenses out here, and we can take a look at them. So first and foremost, well, actually, let's start at the bottom. So first and foremost, you have to knowingly not leave the property or come back on the property. So as I said earlier, sometimes you just don't hear about it. Okay, an officer, a bouncer, somebody will come, they'll address a group of people. You may be mistaken, you may not believe that that applies to you. You may believe that you were not involved in any altercations, and so you don't leave. You're still there because you didn't know, you weren't knowingly trespassing. You were there unknowingly. You didn't know that this reasonable request has been made. So if you can show that you really had no knowledge, you weren't knowingly attempting to remain on that property, you just had no knowledge that you were asked to leave, that's a key element. Okay, if you can show that the government doesn't meet that, they can't prove that you were knowingly in violation of their request to leave, that can be a major factor in having a good resolution in your case. The other way that you can challenge a criminal trespass in the third degree is to kind of back up like I was explaining earlier and do an analysis on what is a reasonable request. Did the person who asked you to leave, was it reasonable of them to do so? Did they give you enough time to comply with that? Was the request done in a manner that's going to convey to you that you need to leave immediately, that you're no longer welcome on the property? In other words, that your permission to be there has been revoked. Are they communicating that to you in a way that you would understand or that a reasonable person would understand? That's what that means. So if they come up and say, hey guys, get out of here, and you leave from one area and go to another area, should you have left the entire scene? Well, probably not. I mean, people are asked to move, people shift around all the time, people make way for big parties, people have to move tables, move seats. There's a lot of reasons why you would move around an establishment. So based on that, that would sort of be an unreasonable request. There's nothing unequivocal about that versus somebody coming up and saying, you are being asked to leave this establishment, do not come back, here's why. That would be very unequivocal, you would understand what they're asking of you, and then you would leave that establishment. But that doesn't happen all the time, okay? A lot of the times it's very loud, it's very noisy, there's poor communication that's happening between two people. So if you are being asked something and you partially comply with that, or the request was not reasonable, meaning it wouldn't be something that that person was communicating to somebody else that other person would be able to understand. That's another element of the statute that they have to meet. All right, the other way that we challenge these is we determine, well, who was making that request? Who was asking you to leave? Who was revoking the permission to be on that property? Was it somebody with the authority to do so? Okay, was it somebody working for that establishment? Was it somebody in an ownership position? Was it the owner themselves? Were they delegating that authority to somebody else within that establishment? Was it an officer acting on their capacity? It's very different than some random individual coming up and saying, get out of here, or I don't want you here anymore. And they have no legal authority to do that. Okay, you have to be in a permission of authority. You have to have some sort of tie to that actual property in order to be asked, in order to have the power to ask somebody to leave. And so that's also a major component. If you can show that that individual didn't have that permission, didn't have that authority to do that, then it's not a reasonable request, and you shouldn't be forced to leave in that regard. Okay, finally, the big one is availability. All right, it's sort of tied into point number 2 here. Who asked, and if that person did have the authority to ask you to leave, are they going to be available throughout the course of this case? You have to understand criminal cases take about 3, 5, sometimes 8 months. It depends on the nature of the case. But are they going to be available throughout that entire process? Okay, the person who asked you to leave, the person who would come into court and testify against you about the fact that they gave you a reasonable request, that you are the person that they asked to leave, that you knowingly stayed there and you did not leave the property even after they made that reasonable request, is that person going to come into trial and testify against you? Or are they going to move on? Are they going to still be employed by that facility? Maybe. Are they going to be somebody who wants to take time out of their day to come into court and testify against you over a Class 3 misdemeanor? Maybe. It really depends. A lot of the times, the people that we interact with in these criminal cases, the bouncers, the club owners, waiters, waitresses, other people in positions of authority, this is their full-time job. They see a lot of these types of cases come through. They are not interested in going to court on every single one of these cases. Otherwise, they'd be in court as much as we are. So they are just not interested in being available. Now, the government, the prosecutors, they can subpoena them. They can give them court orders to come in and testify against you. How aggressive that process is going to be, that's going to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. But it is important to understand that if that person does not want to come in, if they do not want to be very active and involved in the case, they may not be available, and there's unlikely to be anybody else in or around the incident who's going to be able to come in and testify against you. So these are the main defenses that we see. This is the most common type of trespass that we do see. Our office is located about 5 minutes north of the Scottsdale City Court, minutes away from Old Town. So we see this a lot. In particular, the Scottsdale Police Department really like to cite this. So if you've been charged with criminal trespass in the third degree, you, somebody you love, and you want to find out how to get out of it and make sure that your case is not being overly harshly prosecuted against you, you want to come in, speak with me, speak with somebody from my team about putting together a very solid plan for you and your case moving forward, come on in. We offer free case evaluations. Happy to sit down and talk with you. Thanks for watching.